Monica finished her remarks with, where do we go from here? Well, I can only speak for myself. I'm going to get in an airplane and travel. I can't believe it, but I have 2 years sabbatical, and 1 year paid sabbatical and 1 year I'll craft, but I think it will happen. So basically I have 27 months. So what's a good thing for someone like me to do with 27 months? Well, actually I started, to some extent you go back to your roots. And I've always been, despite all these social science categories and chair holders and so on, I started my career as a special correspondent for The Economist. And I still think that is one of the ways I can start thinking about things. I just don't believe what I've written, more or less what other people write, unless I actually go there, talk to people, think about it, and normally go back a second, third, or fourth time. So in a month I'm making my 4th visit to Tunisia in the last year. And that's crucial for how I try and think. And what I'm really going to do, as I said, I'm looking at every one of the world's major religions: Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Orthodoxy, Judaism, from the viewpoint of, I consider all religions multivocal. By that I mean there are elements in them that create problems for toleration and create problems for democracy, in all of them. And it's a mistake if we don't realize that. And all of them, and I try and document this, have things that are usable for toleration and democracy. And then it's normally then a struggle in societies of which values they want to struggle for and privilege in their own place. So what I'll be doing, and there's some, when we think of the different religions, there are interesting problems that come up from this for each one of them. Buddhism, probably from the founder's viewpoint, the founder has written less that causes any problems from the viewpoint of toleration and democracy of Buddhism than any other one. However, there's not a country in the world that has a Theravada Buddhist majority, and there are 8 of them, that's a democracy. So that's a puzzle that I really have to think about. I'm beginning to get some edge on it, and it's not really the political theology of Buddhism, it's the lived history of Buddhists and their image of what they consider a good society. And I wrote a lot about Sri Lanka, and I've been to Thailand. I'll go back to both of them and think about this. But what I mean here is that, to some extent, their image of a good society, it's not from the Buddha, but people who lived in Sri Lanka, was, and really this is before democracy and before colonialism. So that image is, it's, almost think of it as a big vase of us with water. We're all in this vase together. We're all Buddhist, and we have a king who helps us, and we help the king. Okay, it can be people who are outside the vase, but you don't think about it until the question of elections come up. If the question of elections come up, then you have to address the question, hey, we got 23% of the people in this country, Sri Lanka, that's a Buddhist country, that are Hindus, and they speak Tamil. And what's their place here? And partly because they took up education more rapidly than the Buddhists in the South, they were overrepresented from the Buddhist viewpoint in public sector jobs. So actually what happened was the Buddhists began thinking about themselves as a majority with a minority complex. And this really, and there's something like this in Thailand too. So the question of Buddhist societies dealing with territorially based minorities that are majorities in some area, 22%, 23%, how do they become part of a community that's a democracy? You don't have to address that question before colonialism and before, because your community, you might have a funny shape, but these people are up in there in the Northwest, they're out of it. They're not part of it. Okay, I think every one of the religions that you look at can face something. Judaism, one of the problems there that people like Michael Walzer talks about, and he's writing a 3-volume history of Judaism with other people. He said Judaism, for understandable reasons, was never since the fall of the temple, we've never ruled any state. So religions and states that develop theories of how you treat minorities are majorities ruling. But if you've never been a majority ruling, this is a weaker part of your political history and your philosophy. Not that it's against it, but you really have to work on it. And so Michael Walzer, terribly proud of being Jewish, really focus on this. One of the great political theorists, he thinks that's one of the major things he has to look at. And I will be involved with that project a bit there, and I'll go back and forth between Palestine and Israel. Every religion, something interesting comes up like this. And for Islam, I started with a pretty simple, dead simple observation. One, because, as I said, my career as a journalist, I travel all the time. I constantly get in airplanes. When people said that there are very few, that they have, many Americans, without quite thinking it through, have a syllogy in their head. Every part of the syllogy is wrong, but nonetheless, it's that no Arab countries, well, this is, all Arabs are Muslims, wrong. No Arab state is democratic. I think Tunisia will be. But for a time, sometime that was correct. Therefore, no Muslims are democratic. Well, this is absolute nonsense, but the Arabs are only 22% of the world's Muslim population. There are actually 400, I knew, because I'd been in Indonesia, I'd been in Sri Lanka. I know that at independence, the world's largest Muslim population in the world was in India, and they're part of the Indian democracy. So there are basically 400 million Muslims that live in democracy. But the question for me is not so much the outrageous things. I think the world needs to know, how did those countries that are Muslim majority actually become democracies and have a degree of toleration? And I'll include India in this. So I'm really, I've just helped edit a series of, we have a series that's come out of Columbia on Islam, toleration and democracy in Senegal. Same title in Indonesia. That's another book. And we have another book on Turkey. There are different problems and so on, but I want to really figure out how it happens. Or I just wrote an article on Tunisia. I think that the civil society movements in opposition were immensely creative in Egypt and immensely creative in Tunisia. Some of the most creative I've seen. I put them right up there with the Brazilian and the Polish. They're immensely creative. But as a political scientist and someone thinking about democracy, we have to think of something we call political society. Political society is, what type of elections do you create? What type of constitution do you create? What are the political rights of all the citizens? It's a slightly different, it's a significantly different area than civil society. In this sense, I would say that Egypt has the worst political society of the 17 countries I've looked at in democratic transition. And Tunisia has actually one of the best. So that's a fascinating thing to study itself. And part of the mystery, I did not find this out in my first visit to Tunisia. I did not find out in my second visit to Tunisia. I did not find out in my third. But at the end of the third, I found out something that was amazingly similar to what I'd seen and understood in Chile. In Chile, the Christian Democrats hated the socialists, enough so that they helped bring in Pinochet, and the socialists hated the Christian Democrats because of that. But at a certain moment, they said, look, let's agree that both of us hate Pinochet more than we hate each other. Let's also agree that we made a lot of mistakes. And let's agree if we ever have a chance, we'll do it differently. By the way, this is the same discourse that Juan Linz and I have documented for Spain. Huge discourse. Basically, the Spanish transition was almost done while Franco was alive, because people had arrived at positions on this. Okay, in Tunisia, I was flabbergasted. Every year since 2003, 5 of the 6 parties that are the largest parties now in the Constituent Assembly met privately and discussed this question. The secularists said, we would like to make a democracy, but we can't trust you, Islamic group. And the Islamic group said, we would like to make a democracy, but you're never going to let us participate. And they talked about this. And they began working through the next 8 years, giving each other a series of relatively credible commitments and binding guarantees, almost all of which have been honored. And so one key thing in the twin tolerations is that religious people have to give sufficient autonomy, toleration, of democratic authorities that they say voters are sovereign. And that voters and citizens write laws. And they have to accept that. If you say it's God-made law, then this is a violation of the twin tolerations. And on the other hand, secularists, and if you're a hard secularist, Ataturk secularist, Bourguiba secularists in Tunisia, what I call the iron triangle of hard secularism, 1905 secularism in France, that secularism almost doesn't give much space, sufficient space for religious individuals to speak in civil society, to act in political society. Now, they declare this illegal. Even to this day, the constitution in Turkey virtually declares it illegal for religious people to act publicly. Okay, so there was this debate, and the secularists got a lot of things out of the Islamists, and the Islamists got a lot of things out of the secularists, and so far everyone's honored this. But then they had to do, this is political society. They say, what sort of electoral system we have? And Ennahda, the Islamist party, said, let's go for PR, proportional representation, because they actually knew that if there was a simple majority election, they still, even though they've been exiled, almost all of them, and out of the country, they would win a simple British type of first-past-the-post plurality in 90% or more of all the areas. Then that would be perceived as Algeria, and people wouldn't participate in that. So actually, Ennahda said, let's go for PR. Because their guess was that they would get 35 to 40% of the vote. In PR, they'd get 35 to 40% of the seats. So they have 39% of the seats. Now, what's great about this, and Ennahda understood it, and everyone understood it, if you function as a parliamentary group, and that's what the Constituent Assembly is, you need 50.1% in the coalition. So Ennahda only has 39%. They have to make up the ruling coalition with secular parties. And if they don't accept this, and they let their constituency that are not as socialized as the leaders demand things, the government will fall. And so these are serious political constraints that people will understand. Okay, I think every one of the religions I can do stuff like needs having some work done like this. So I'll write a short chapter on Senegal, a short chapter, a long chapter on Indonesia. I'll write a very long chapter on India, etc. Thank you very much. That's what I'll do on my holiday.
Thank you very much.